Well, is this a flash in the pan or something more? With me now to talk about the state of the publishing industry is Bethanne Patrick. She's writer, editor, and journalist who's been reviewing books and interviewing authors for over 20 years. Bethanne, welcome to the show. Everybody talked about during the pandemic the boost for Netflix. They said everybody's staying at home and watching online streaming services, but many of them were actually buying books and reading those, it seems.
They were, Roee. Thank you so much for having me this evening. And I want to say it is true. Lots of people have been reading in the past year or two over the pandemic with lots of uncertainty in the world. And it can be really comforting and safe to turn to a book.
What is the most popular genre that we saw over the past year and a half? Were people reading things about pandemics, or were they reading about more romantic eras, perhaps?
Well, there's a couple of things going on here. I am a huge GBBO fan, and I'm reading cookbooks and baking books and all of that sort of thing. But actually, the biggest spike in sales in hardcover books or paperback books, paper books, I should say, has been in graphic novels. Huge spike in 2020 in graphic novels. And here's the thing I want to say about those before I say one or two other genres that are popular right now. Graphic novels aren't just comic books for kids anymore, and nor are they just sort of entertainment anymore. There are really serious, wonderful graphic books, memoirs, novels, histories, all kinds of things out there. And I think anyone can find something. A couple that I recommend this year, for example, are Kristen Radke's Seek You, which is a sort of a long meditation about solitude and loneliness, which is great for someone, coming out of this pandemic isolation. Another one is Alison Bechdel's The Secret to Superhuman Strength. And that is a fantastic look at a lifetime spent seeking the perfect form of physical exercise, but does that really make us happy? Is maybe there's something else in, for instance, the transcendentalist philosophy that grew up in the United States in the 19th century that might make things great. But among all these graphic books, I have to say, you touched on something with romance there. There is a lot of interest in romance, and particularly historical romance and historical fiction. I think this is for a couple of reasons. One is that these books are great fun, and you can learn a lot from some of them too, but also because when we look at history, whether it's a book that is primarily about a romance or it's a book that's about something a little more complicated, we learn a lot. We learn a lot from history and seeing what humans have done in other eras. And at this point in time, I think that's very helpful for people.
And it reminds people perhaps of a different time when things were slightly different. I want to ask you, we've been showing some images here of bookstores. I do know that publishers and authors, of course, rely on promotional tours, book fairs. How has that been different, obviously, during the pandemic?
Well, it's been so different. And here's the news. It's not necessarily going to go back to status quo anytime soon. This is something we really know in the publishing industry, because whether it's at a bookstore, a library, another venue, a restaurant, etc., people are not eager to gather in large groups, and for very good reason. So publishers are taking a cautious route at sending authors out on fully fledged book tours. People who run reading series, whether it's a private, foundation or something that's just put together by a bunch of friends who are writers, all of these are being hit by this. We're all eager to gather again, to see each other. I know I've seen so many fellow authors and writers on Instagram saying, we got 5 of us together or 10 of us together, but people are wondering, gosh, is it ever going to be safe enough to have, 200 or 300 people in the same place? So publishers are taking a very cautious line on that.
It was an election year, and it seemed like anyone who's ever met Trump wrote a book about him, a lot of politically themed books. Do you think that'll continue?
Yes, absolutely. And here's the thing, Peril in September, Bob Woodward's book that came out, was, huge selling, very, very important. We saw before that Rage by Bob Woodward. So books like that are seeing great sales. But the other thing that we're seeing, I think, is not just in the US about Trump and about politics here. I think we're seeing a move to more political books all around the world. And not only is that because there are things happening, we know that all around the world, but I think it's also that younger people are starting to realize that if you want to write about something, maybe you can write something really short. For instance, think of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's We Should All Be Feminists, a very slim little volume that she wrote several years ago. People are returning to that form, the sort of, I don't know what you would call it, a treatise, a pamphlet, a thought piece. And I think we're going to see more of that in all regions of the world from people who are thinking deeply about politics, but also know that things change so fast politically that you can't always wait for a book to be traditionally published in order to get a political idea formed.
Bethanne Patrick, thank you for your insight.